Hello, everyone. My name is Catalina Garcia, and this is my presentation on eukaryotic cells for my educational presentation. So first, this presentation, this lecture is meant to be for AP biology students. It is going to revolve around the eukaryotic cells as they are different from prokaryotic cells. We will describe them by their organelles, the cytoplasmic membrane, as well as their method of acquiring energy, which are all fundamental things that differentiate the eukaryotic cell from the prokaryotic cell. At the end of this presentation, there will be applied research that students will be able to further delve in on this topic on, and then there will also be some exercises as review. The stated concepts here are important. The eukaryotic cell is the fundamental cell as it encompasses life. Here it represents animals, plants, protists, and fungi, which we will get on later into the presentation. So eukaryotic cell is very important to science. It is a foundational topic, and all biology students should be well-versed in this category. So for objectives, there are going to be 4 parts to this presentation. The first part being, what is the difference between a eukaryotic and prokaryotic cell? What is a eukaryotic cell? The main differences. Next, we will go into eukaryotic organization, how the eukaryotic cells organize their contents, and more specifically, we will be going into membrane-bound organelles as well as the nucleus. Next, we will go into understanding the cytoplasmic membrane, which is what encases eukaryotic cells. And then we will finish up with understanding how eukaryotic cells acquire energy, which is necessary as its fuel for the cell. And as I stated earlier, after these objectives are discussed, we will have applied research and exercises to review. Okay. So here we have eukaryotic versus prokaryotic cells. The key differences are that prokaryotic cells encompass such things as cyanobacteria, bacteria, and archaea. Here we can see, I'm pretty sure you can see my mouse. So I will be pointing eukaryotic cells, which is bacteria, archaea, cyanobacteria, as I stated. And then eukaryotic cells are what we can see much more easily, which are animals, plants, protists, and fungi. Here we have a generalized example of the two. So this would be the eukaryotic, and this would be the prokaryotic cell. They vastly look different. Next, eukaryotic cells have a nucleus as well as membrane-bound organelles, while prokaryotic cells do not. So to repeat, prokaryotic cells do not have membrane-bound organelles or a nucleus, which houses their DNA. This is solely exclusive to eukaryotic cells. As we stated earlier, are animals, plants, protists, and fungi. So those are 2 key differences between the two. Next are eukaryotic cells. The size difference between eukaryotic and prokaryotic cells can be quite extensive. As you know, an animal compared to bacteria is a vast size difference. So that's another difference between these 2 cell types. Again, just to state, prokaryotic cells are cyanobacteria, bacteria, and archaea, very, very tiny, minuscule things, while eukaryotic cells can be tiny. There are protists, fungi, but they can also be larger as animals or plants are seen. Next, eukaryotic cells, more into their organelles and how they are organized. We have basic organelles that are listed. Obviously, there are more here. On this picture, we have their visual aspect of them. There will be primary organelles we will be going over. So the first being the nucleus, as we see here, is where the cell houses its DNA, its genetic material. Next, we have mitochondria, which we can find here. And this is essential to energy projection. This is where cellular respiration occurs, which we will talk about later. Next, we have chloroplasts, and we also have ribosomes, chloroplasts. This is where photosynthesis occurs in plants. And then ribosomes is where protein synthesis occurs. Lysosomes being where protein destruction occurs. And these are shortened generalized definitions. At the end, there are resources to find out more specific details and information on these organelles, but these are shortened, generalized definitions of them. So again, the nucleus, mitochondria, chloroplasts, ribosomes, and lysosomes. Next, we have continued organelles. We have the Golgi apparatus. This is where protein transport and export occur. Then we have the endoplasmic reticulum, which is two-parted. We have the rough ER, which is where production and modification of protein happens. And then lipid production and detoxification occurs in the smooth ER. So as you can see here, the rough ER has little ribosomes on them. And then the smooth ER here, again, I'm assuming you can see my mouse. Smooth ER occurs here. If you can't see my mouse, the picture is labeled. So the smooth ER and the rough ER. Again, that's where lipid production and detoxification occurs in the smooth, and then protein production occurs in the rough ER. Lastly, we have the cytoskeleton, which is the intracellular transport as well as cell movement. This is where this occurs. This is on the outside. Let's see if this picture does not look like it shows it, but it would be like on the outside, assuming you can see my mouse, on the outside of the cell membrane. So these are the basic kind of generalized organelles, but again, at the end of the presentation, you can look deeper into every single organelle that you see here labeled. Okay, so going into the cytoplasmic membrane, this is the fundamental information. It is a phospholipid bilayer. So as you can see here, this picture, it's a little blurry, but you can see that there's two layers, so that's why it's called the lipid bilayer, and then these lipids are here. So this double layer has hydrophilic heads, which of the lipids, which are these little balls you can see, facing the external area as well as the intracellular area. So, excuse me, here on the outside, the hydrophilic heads are facing the outside because hydrophilic, meaning water loving, are in contact with water, liquid, I would say. And so this is on the outside of the cell, and then here on the inside of the cell. So the membrane is double layered. On the inside, we see these little tails, which are hydrophobic, meaning water repelling, water not loving, hating. And so they face the inside as they're safe from the intracellular and extracellular fluids. So that's how the lipid bilayer moves. It's the fluid mosaic model. And so it's not just a stationary, it's not rigid, it is very fluid and kind of moves with the proteins and other chains that are embedded into the bilayer. So as you can see here, that there are proteins and other such things that are embedded into the cytoplasm. Into the membrane, and that allows for transport, which we will talk about later. But this is the general idea, the generalization of the fluid mosaic model of the membrane. So next, continuing on that, so more of the function, it is selectively permeable, so it controls what passes into and out of the cell. Nutrients and ions pass into the cell via this membrane. Active transport would be these proteins. It's the cell using energy for transport in or out of the cell. This would be things like molecules and ions. And then there's passive transport, which could be diffusion, facilitated diffusion, or simple diffusion, and then osmosis. So that would be without energy being used from the cell as things pass through. So that is the cytoplasmic membrane. Next, we have eukaryotic cells and energy. For animal cells, cellular respiration occurs. This takes place in the mitochondria, as I stated earlier. Animal cells rely on the mitochondria to convert the chemical nutrients into usable energy. The cells use ATP. So this is the currency of energy in the cell. In animal cells, ATP is necessary for cellular function. And you can see here in our picture, we have mitochondria. And cellular respiration produces ATP as well as carbon dioxide and water. They are converted from oxygen and glucose. And that is necessary as we go into chloroplasts, what happens in plants. Again, this is eukaryotic cells, plants, happens a little differently. So again, animal cells, mitochondria, cellular respiration, ATP is a currency of energy. So in photosynthesis, plant cells need both chloroplasts, which is where photosynthesis occurs. Plant cells need both chloroplasts as well as mitochondria because it's like a two-step process. So first, photosynthesis occurs. It converts energy, light energy, water, carbon dioxide into oxygen, it takes place in the chloroplast, it creates energy, but we have this end product, which is glucose, and the cell doesn't use, that's not the currency for plant cells. So the glucose needs to be broken down. And as we saw earlier with the cellular respiration here, oxygen and glucose, which is what photosynthesis creates, are the primary things that go into cellular respiration. So plant cells create oxygen and glucose from photosynthesis, but then need that glucose to be broken down by cellular respiration to create a usable energy unit. So here it states, plant cells use photosynthesis taking place in the chloroplast to create energy and need the mitochondria to break down the products from the photosynthesis. So it's a big circle, they need both. And that is different from animal cells. That is exclusive to plant cells. Next, we have exercises. These are great exercises to sum up the information that we did just go through. These questions are primary to the information. So let's do a quick recap. We have the difference between eukaryotic and prokaryotic cells. Eukaryotic cells being what we were going over. Their main difference being that eukaryotic cells have membrane-bound organelles as well as a nucleus. We go into the organelles, explicitly generalizations and definitions of them. And then we have our picture, so the organelles. And then we have the cytoplasmic membrane, how it is a double bilayer, a phospholipid bilayer here. And then we go into energy, so cellular respiration. Again, I'm just restating our objectives that we had earlier. So cellular respiration takes place in the mitochondria. This is primary to animal cells. And we did learn that plant cells need both chloroplasts as well as mitochondria, as photosynthesis has energy units, which are glucose that the plant cell needs broken down further, which uses cellular respiration for. So for exercises, you can answer these questions either to yourself or you could write them down. They would be great study notes, great study points. You should be able to explain the cytoplasmic membrane, how it's a bilayer, the lipids, hydrophobic, hydrophilic, what we went over earlier. Then you would be able to answer the question, do plants use mitochondria? Do they need cellular respiration? Why and how? And then what is allowed to pass through the cytoplasmic membrane, which we did go over. Further, you could describe the cytoplasmic membrane and the different transports, active and passive. Next, you should be able to describe the organelles, a generalized definition as I gave earlier. You should be able to choose 4 organelles randomly, describe their function. And it is very interesting. And here, next we have applied science. So in these papers here, you can find, especially in this second one, organelles of the eukaryotic cell here. If you can see my mouse, it's the second one, the one that starts with the name Lodish. And this, you can see how the organelles do connect as protein is made, as DNA is transcribed and transferred. It's very interesting to see how the organelles connect. But for this exercise, you can choose 4 organelles, describe their function, especially when you get to the rough ER, protein synthesis, and ribosomes, those do connect. So that is very interesting. You should be able to describe the organelles. And lastly, we have what are the necessary components for cellular respiration, which we went over earlier when we were talking about energy. And where does this process occur, which we did learn was in the mitochondria. And it happens in both animal and plant cells, which we learned. So going back to this applied science, these 2 papers will help you go deeper into the topics that we discussed today. The first one being the connection between photosynthesis and cellular respiration, specifically in plants. And the second one here being the Lodish, what we talked about a little bit earlier, is greater definitions and connections between the organelles. Lastly, here we have visual resources. So I provided the reading material, you're hearing me speak, and then there are pictures, but if you need just a little bit more or you just want a different medium of this information, you can watch these videos. They're not as extensive, but they do cover the same general objectives. The first one being the cell membrane, its structure, its function, and the fluid mosaic model. This is very interesting because you can see how the model kind of has when the cell moves and how it ripples, it's not rigid, it's fluid. And you can see how the proteins and active and passive transport go through. So this is a very interesting video to watch for more information on that. And then lastly, we have organelles, just a visualization of the organelles, how they look, how they connect. So that is my presentation on eukaryotic cells. Again, we went over their difference, how they differentiate from prokaryotic cells, their membrane-bound organelles, organization, how they acquire energy, and then some nice review. And this was my presentation. Thank you so very much. My name is Catalina Garcia. Thank you.